Well, I started the channel about almost 3 months ago, so it's very, very new. I'm trying to build up a subscriber base and a viewer base. And what I've tried to do up to this point is try and approach our theological perspective, our very unique one, through the perspective of the Bible itself, particularly the New Testament. Trying to directly deal with what I consider are warped and twisted interpretations of the Bible, but not in a way that conventionality wants to tell you they're warped and twisted. That's completely something else. This is something that I mean to say is warped and twisted based upon what I feel is a real first century perspective. But now I want to take a different tack. I want to start trying to explain my perspective not through the Bible, because there's so much baggage that comes with the Bible, and so much baggage that comes with Christianity particularly. I want to start to do it more and more by a commentary on, not necessarily on common events in the news, but on our world, on the post-fall world. Trying to explain why we are the way that we are, why we think the way that we are, why we have clear problems, but we do not recognize what those problems are, or we don't admit what those problems are, and we make no attempt to resolve them. I believe that they are more than resolvable, but they're only resolvable when we do it with our prophetic hermeneutic that we use here. Everything is understood through the prophetic revelation. And I don't mean prophetic revelation in the sense that conventional religion wants to tell you it is. It's not some general revelation. It's not what theology likes to call just simply special revelation. I'm talking about the messianic revelation itself, the messianic prophetic one. So I want to do, as a first salvo in this conversation, something about the number one problem, the foremost problem that we have, and that is with the current corrupt epistemic paradigm in which we operate without realizing it. And that paradigm is called realism and idealism, and in more common parlance, that is called conservatism and liberalism. So hopefully I'll be able to get my point through this particular avenue, since it's more mundane. And we like to think of transcendent things through our world and the mundane things, instead of directly arguing them directly. And I realize that in this video, I'm going to bring up a million questions that are not going to be answered. This is just a template. I'm trying to make it as comprehensive as I can in a short video, but it's nowhere near going to be exhaustive. It's just kind of drawing the bare outlines of my worldview. So here's a question. If Paul were alive today, or any of the apostles, or particularly Jesus, and he looked at our world, what would he think about it? What would he say? Here, we're going to attempt here to resolve that. Conservatism and liberalism aren't merely political categories. They're the latest manifestation of something that began in Eden. And I've done videos on this before, and I've touched on this many times on this channel, but here I want to give something more comprehensive. And that is what we call realism and idealism are two halves of the post-Edenic mind. They are regressive, not progressive. They represent spiritual decline under the appearance of civilizational advancement. Now, realism. Realism is the control of unrevealed objective things. It masters land, biology, law, infrastructure, technology, economics. It builds outward stability. It fortifies against chaos. It assumes the problem is external disorder. Okay, you follow me? Idealism is the control of unrevealed, subjective things. It masters narrative, identity, meaning, psychology, interpretation. It reconstructs inward reality. It assumes the problem is misperception, oppression, or conceptual distortion. Now, both of these, keep in mind, are imminent. Both assume transcendence must be reached, inferred, or constructed from below. Neither begins with what has been given from above, not like we think that it is. Now you contrast that with the transcendent pattern. There are revealed objective things. God entering history, divine phenomena displayed, events declared beforehand and fulfilled. And there are revealed subjective things, understanding granted, sight given, interpretation that does not originate in man but is bestowed. In both cases, the initiative belongs to transcendence. The object is given, the understanding is given as well. Now, Eden displays the original order. There was no need for autonomous realism or autonomous idealism. There was command. There was presence. There was relational clarity. No inference, interpretation, or symbolism necessary. The structure was initiatory and receptive. God initiates. The man receives and guards the original command. The woman participates and unfolds what is given. Subjectivity derives from objectivity, and objectivity derives from God. Now, let's pause here for a moment and reflect on maleness and femaleness that God created to communicate something about ourselves from which we can fall. Okay, here it is. Is it coincidence that males across cultures and centuries tend toward object orientation more than person orientation? That they gravitate toward structure, territory, engineering, hierarchy, physical exertion, measurable accomplishment? That they are on average physically stronger? That they compete for status, for respect, for outward achievement? That they are disproportionately drawn to building, defending, inventing, confronting the external world? Also, do we think that it is mere coincidence that females across cultures and centuries tend toward person orientation? That they are oriented toward relationship, nurture, interior communication, verbal articulation, social cohesion? That they bear children, literally embodying the receptivity and generative interiority? That they are more attuned to emotional nuance, relational tension, subjective states? That their strength manifests less in external force and more in interior formation? Now look, these are not moral rankings. They are patterned tendencies embedded in embodied creation. The male principle, broadly speaking, is initiatory, external, object-facing, structurally assertive. The female principle, broadly speaking, is receptive, interior, relationally interpretative, and formative. This polarity is not accidental biology. It is theological symbolism embedded in flesh. Eden is not merely a story about how the universe was made. No way. It's a revelation of how God relates to man. Eden displays the original order. There was no need for autonomous realism or autonomous idealism. There was command. There was presence. There was relational clarity. No inference was necessary. No symbolic assent was required. The structure was initiatory and receptive. God initiates. The man receives and guards the command. The woman participates and unfolds what is given. Subjectivity derives from objectivity, and objectivity derives from God. The man is not the source of truth. He is the guardian of what is given. The woman is not passive emptiness. She is the one through whom life multiplies what is received. This is why divine self-revelation uses masculine language, not because God is biologically male, but because he initiates, he commands, he gives, creation receives. The fall is not merely disobedience, it is inversion. The serpent does not overpower Adam physically. He reorders authority epistemically. He introduces autonomous interpretation into the receptive sphere. The subjective evaluates the command. The initiatory structure collapses, and Adam abdicates his guarding role. He does not confront, he acquiesces. From that moment, the dialectic fractures. The receptive becomes initiatory. The initiatory becomes passive. Interpretation precedes command. Subjectivity evaluates objectivity. And that fracture scales upward into history. So pay close attention. Realism becomes exaggerated masculinity without revelation, force without divine command. Idealism becomes exaggerated femininity without revelation, interiority without divine grounding. When detached from the vertical axis of revelation, both degenerate. Now, bring that into the present day carefully. The modern age increasingly evaluates the subjective pole. Emotion, identity, internal narrative, lived experience. These are treated as primary. Objective structure is treated as negotiable. Biology becomes fluid. Authority becomes oppressive by definition. Law becomes violence. Fixed rule becomes tyranny. This is not about women. This is about subjectivity unmoored from initiatory transcendence. At the same time, the so-called realism collapses. Instead of guarding revelation, it defends culture. Instead of anchoring itself in fulfilled divine disclosure, it clings to natural structure. And when subjective force rises, it retreats, it capitulates. Now, we ask why? Because natural objectivity, unrevealed objectivity, is not the same as revealed objectivity. Natural strength decays. Natural law erodes. Natural hierarchy collapses under sustained subjective pressure. Only revealed transcendence commands enduring allegiance. So, the male-female polarity in Eden is not a sociological blueprint. It's a theological model. It reveals the relation between transcendence and humanity. When that order holds, realism and idealism are harmonized under revelation. When it inverts, history oscillates between force and feeling, structure and sentiment, domination and dissolution. Now you can see here that we are not talking merely about male and female as biological categories. We are talking about an epistemic paradigm. We are talking about original initiative and rational reception of reality. And it is ordered descent into the emotional and affective center of the mind, where what we may call the spirit. This is the organized pattern of knowing. The male-female polarity is embodied symbolism of a deeper structure. It reflects the pattern of how truth is meant to move. First, something appears. Something objective. Something outside the self. Something fixed, given, unbendable. Second, it is received, guarded, recognized. Third, it descends into the interior life, into affection, emotion, loyalty, devotion, love. Fourth, from that union, life is produced. Now, this is not hierarchy of worth. It is order of movement. The initiatory pole does not create itself. It receives from transcendence. The receptive pole does not invent meaning. It unfolds what has been given. The two together generate life. So look, we're not talking about physical maleness and femaleness as social categories. We are talking about the equal but opposing convergence of phenomenon and feeling, of objective disclosure and subjective embrace. When these are ordered correctly, they create life, particularly spiritual life. Spiritual life is born when a fixed and unbendable appearance of something outside both poles interrupts them. Something neither the objective builder nor the subjective interpreter can generate. Something that stands over them both. And that is revelation. Without that fixed external appearance, the initiatory pole becomes domination. The receptive pole becomes self-creation. Force hardens. Feeling dissolves. They war. But when something appears historically, phenomenally, prophetically, and both poles bow to it, a different order emerges. The objective guards it. The subjective loves it. And from that union, new life, spiritual life, forms. That is the original Edenic structure. God initiates. Man receives and guards. The woman unfolds and multiplies what is given. Life emerges from ordered union. Now let's translate that epistemically. Revealed phenomenon appears. Reason accepts and guards it. The Spirit embraces it and internalizes it. Faith lives. When the order reverses, when feeling evaluates phenomenon, when interpretation precedes givenness, when interiority claims primacy, the dialectic fractures. And what we see culturally is not merely gender confusion, but epistemic confusion. Because the issue is not male versus female. The issue is whether revelation initiates, whether we know this revelation, and whether we value it among everything. If revelation does not initiate, both realism and idealism operate autonomously. The objective pole tries to dominate through natural strength and law. The subjective pole tries to create meaning through feeling and self-definition. Neither can generate spiritual life. But when a fixed, external, prophetic disclosure interrupts both, something neither side authored, then the pattern is restored. And that is the paradigm Genesis reveals. Not merely how bodies were made and how the universe was made, but how knowledge, authority, love, obedience, and spiritual life were meant to flow. Now let's go into this a little bit deeper and go back to Eden. And like I said, I've done videos on this before, so I beg you to go back and review those. You won't get this interpretation anywhere else. And when you start to think about it, you'll understand why, because we're living in a fallen world. The serpent introduces autonomous interpretation. This is in Eve's objective, self-focused court. instead of to objective revelation. The question is no longer what was given, but how it may be reinterpreted. Concept precedes obedience, fact, rule, fixed operating parameter. The subjective evaluates the objective. And Adam's failure is not aggression, but abdication. He does not guard the revealed word. He permits interpretive autonomy to override phenomenal command. That is why in Eden, Adam is blamed and not Eve. From that fracture, history oscillates. First, after Eden, and we are ejected into the natural and hostile worlds, survival realism. The post-Edenic world is physically and spiritually vulnerable. Humanity builds agriculture, metallurgy, city-states, law, empire. Objective mastery compensates for lost immediacy with God. Now, then the idealist ascent. As objective success stabilizes the world, interior abstraction expands. Greece systematizes the split. Plato seeks transcendence through contemplation. Aristotle through structured observation. Both attempt ascent without phenomenal disclosure. Rome perfects objective mastery, but success weakens vigilance. Subjective interiority intensifies. Mystery religions, speculative metaphysics, autonomous spiritualities multiply. And after Rome, the fracture deepens. Descartes turns certainty inward. Cogito. The thinking subject becomes foundation. Kant mediates reality through mental categories. Freud relocates meaning into hidden drives. Saussure detaches sign from referent. Derrida dissolves stable meaning altogether. The subjective load dominates. Facts become constructions. Meaning becomes fluid. Modern conservatism is residual realism. It reinserts biology, law, borders, tradition, material fact. Modern liberalism is amplified idealism. It reasserts identity, narrative, interior authenticity, self-definition. They are not opposites in origin. They are estranged siblings of the same post-Edenic split. Realism attempts to restrain subjectivism. Idealism attempts to emancipate subjectivity. Neither reconciles the fracture. They escalate. They exhaust themselves. When transcendence cannot be received, it is simulated. Artificial intelligence, virtual identity, technological immortality. Artificial transcendence replaces revealed transcendence. And now the theological line must be drawn carefully. Realism and idealism are effective survival strategies for unrevealed minds. They build civilizations, great. They stabilize societies, great. They produce philosophy, science, and law, fine. But if imported into Christianity as foundational categories, they share in the same death spiral. Conservative Christianity becomes cultural realism. Liberal Christianity becomes therapeutic idealism. One preserves structures, the other reconstructs experience. Both detach from the initiatory center. The reconciliation of realism and idealism cannot occur through balance. It cannot occur through synthesis. It cannot occur through political compromise. It requires a negative, transcendent middle. No subject generated, not object inferred, not imminent. It must interrupt history. Transcendence must initiate. Objective revelation must be given. Subjective understanding must be granted. When the given word is recognized, realism becomes servant, and idealism becomes servant. Neither becomes master. The oscillation began when interpretation overruled revelation. It will not end by balancing object and subject. It ends only when the mind returns to receiving what it cannot produce. And now we're going to identify what that is. So now we move from metaphysical architecture to historical indictment. The goal is to demonstrate that Christian conservatism and Christian liberalism are not operating from revealed transcendence, but from the same unrevealed oscillation that has governed imminent civilization since Eden. We begin with the Roman moment. By the 1st century, the Greco-Roman world had achieved what appeared to be a functional balance between realism and idealism. Rome embodied realism, law, roads, military order, administrative precision, engineering mastery. Greece had already provided idealism, metaphysics, forms, logic, categories of being, speculative assent. By the Pax Romana, the two had stabilized into an imminent equilibrium. The objective order and conceptual abstraction coexisted. It was precisely at this moment of equilibrium that the transcendent alternative entered history. Christ did not offer improved realism. He did not offer refined idealism. He offered revealed objective intervention grounded in what Moses and the prophets said would occur, and revealed subjective recognition granted to those who saw. The transcendent real was fulfilled prophecy. The transcendent ideal was future restoration under Messiah. The past proved transcendence. The future promised its consummation. This was not an imminent balance. It was a vertical interruption. But instead of subordinating realism and idealism to this revealed axis, Christianity gradually absorbed the imminent pattern. They did it like this. First shift, conceptual upswing, prophetic downsizing. In the 2nd and 3rd centuries, the apologetic project increasingly translated the faith into philosophical categories. Justin Martyr, Clement of Alexandria, Origen, each in different ways attempted to harmonize Christ with Platonism. The faith became unintelligible through metaphysics rather than through fulfilled messianic disclosure. The prophetic ground receded, ontology expanded. By the time of the great councils, the categories of substance, essence, the nature, and nature were doing structural work that prophetic continuity once performed. The church defended truth, but increasingly through conceptual articulation rather than through the simple claim. This happened as written. The transcendent real shifted from fulfilled prophecy to metaphysical coherence. Second shift, realist consolidation. With Constantine and the post-Constantinian order, Christianity aligned with imperial structure, law, order, hierarchy, visible authority. The church became institutionally realist. The transcendent was defended through political and social form. Prophetic expectation receded into liturgy and creed. The Roman equilibrium reasserted itself inside Christianity. Now, then comes the Reformation. Here again, an opportunity for return. The scripture was elevated, but even here, the prophetic center was not fully restored. The conflict quickly became one of doctrinal systems. Scholastic Protestantism mirrored scholastic Catholicism in method. The battle was conceptual architecture versus conceptual architecture. The prophetic narrative ground remains secondary to systematic coherence. Now, move this all forward. Enlightenment modernity intensified the subjective turn. Liberal theology in the 19th century explicitly relocated authority into religious consciousness. Schleiermacher grounded faith in feeling of absolute dependence. Rickstill emphasized ethical community. The transcendent became interiorized. Fulfilled prophecy was treated as mythic scaffolding rather than epistemic foundation. This is the Christian idealism in full form. Subjective religious experience precedes revealed event. Conservative reaction in the 20th century swung realist. Fundamentalism and later evangelical conservatism emphasized factual inerrancy, propositional truth, historical reliability. But even here, the grounding often became the abstract doctrine of Scripture rather than the specific messianic arc that Scripture itself declares. The transcendent real was defended as a set of correct statements rather than as fulfilled prophetic intervention. Thus, both sides followed the unrevealed pattern. Christian liberalism mirrors idealism, meaning, inclusion, evolving interpretation, identity, narrative reconstruction. Authority arises from community and experience. Revelation becomes dynamic, not fixed. Christian conservatism mirrors realism, preservation of moral order, institutional stability, doctrinal boundaries, cultural defense. Authority arises from inherited structure and established fact. Both operate horizontally. The prophetic center, that God publicly declared beforehand what he would do in Messiah and then did it, becomes background assumption rather than governing axis. Now let's return to the Edenic structure, I should say. The original order was this: transcendent initiates, man guards revealed commands, subjectivity unfolds from given objectivity. In Christian liberalism, subjectivity now evaluates revelation. The interpretive community stands above the text. Experience refines doctrine. The female principle in the symbolic language of interior generativity now initiates. In Christian conservatism, objectivity is defended, but often as static structure disconnected from living prophetic continuity. The male principle, again, symbolically speaking, defends past imminent order rather than remaining anchored to revealed transcendence. The objective becomes cultural and institutional rather than prophetic. In both cases, the revealed pattern is displaced by unrevealed compensations. The Roman equilibrium reappears. Realism and idealism in tension but coexisting. Yet the vertical axis is thin. Messianic prophecy becomes devotional ornament rather than epistemic foundation. The conceptual upswing is visible in liberal theology. Deconstruction, narrative hermeneutics, postmodern ecclesiology. The realist downswing appears in reactionary apologetics, culture war Christianity, nationalism. Both intensify, neither reconciles. But the true transcendent real remains fulfilled prophecy in Jesus of Nazareth, objective historical disclosure. The true transcendent ideal remains future restoration under Messiah alone. Not utopian progress, not civilizational preservation, but consummation promised. When prophecy is displaced, transcendence becomes either preserved tradition, moral reform, doctrinal coherence, or spiritual experience. All of these are imminent substitutes. Thus, the present state. Christian liberalism dissolves into subjectivism because its authority is interpretive community. Christian conservatism hardens into cultural realism because its authority is institutional continuity. Each critiques the other. Each mirrors the ancient fracture. The Roman world arrived at imminent balance. Christ introduced transcendent alternative. The church slowly reabsorbed the imminent oscillation. The conceptual and subjective upswing is visible historically in Alexandrian allegorical dominance over prophetic literal continuity. Medieval scholastic metaphysics, Enlightenment religious interiority, Schleiermacher in modern liberal theology, postmodern hermeneutics. The downswing of messianic prophecy is visible in decline of typological preaching grounded in predictive continuity, reduction of prophecy to proof text rather than structural framework, replacement of prophetic fulfillment with systematic theology as center, replacement of prophetic expectation with moral activism or cultural defense. So look, our conclusion has to be real precise here. Christian conservatism and liberalism are not wrong because they are right or left. They are wrong insofar as they operate within the unrevealed pattern of realism and idealism. They attempt to stabilize or reconstruct imminence. They do not stand primarily on revealed transcendence. The corrective is not moderation between them. It is recentering on the vertical axis. The Father's word, declared beforehand and fulfilled in Messiah, grounding both objective reality and subjective recognition. Now, without that axis, the church repeats Rome's balance and Rome's exhaustion at once. With that axis, realism and idealism become tools rather than masters. Now look, if you can't see this pattern, let me reinstate it in terms closer to home. Genesis did not merely describe a moral lapse. It revealed a structural inversion. The serpent introduced autonomous interpretation. The subjective evaluated the command. What was given became negotiable. The order of initiation reversed. Now you ask yourself, has that inversion become undone? Or has it matured across history? What do so-called conservatives repeatedly acquiesce? Why do so-called conservatives repeatedly acquiesce to liberal innovations? Consider the pattern. The normalization of divorce. The institutionalization of the sexual revolution. The legal redefinition of marriage. The rapid accommodation of gender ideology. The quiet adoption of speech codes within institutions once committed to open discourse. Each time realism resists, then adjusts. Each time it says it must face social reality. Each time it absorbs what it once opposed. Why? Because most conservative realism is grounded not in revealed transcendence, but in natural order. Biology, custom, institutional continuity, inherited moral structure. These are imminent goods. They are defensible, but they are not miraculous disclosures. They can be reasoned into existence without revelation. And what is merely natural is subject to entropy. Law erodes, custom erodes, institutions erode, language erodes, but they were never anchored to fulfill transcendence, only to autonomous order. Now look at liberalism. Why the constant rebellion against anything that suggests fixed rule, law, biology, gender, God, objectivity, authority? Why does rebellion intensify rather than moderate? Because when transcendence is not given, subjectivity must expand. Feeling becomes authority. Experience becomes law. Authenticity replaces obedience. The self becomes creative source. Liberalism sinks deeper into radical subjectivity because nothing interrupts it. Vertically, it is not tethered to a revealed event that commands recognition. It floats on interiority. But realism continues to capitulate because it too was never vertical. From the beginning, its facts were natural facts. Its law was natural law. Its God was often resembled philosophical first cause rather than fulfilled prophetic disclosure. These are categories Athens can generate without Jerusalem. They require no miracle to command allegiance. They are autonomously pagan in origin. When subjectivity assaults them, they weaken. When they were never grounded in revelation. Nature decays, revelation does not. So ask the question plainly. Is the Genesis inversion being reversed in our time, or is it reaching its full maturity? Is revelation governing object and subject, or are object and subject governing revelation? If the church continues to operate inside the unrevealed pattern, defending nature on the right and expanding experience on the left, it will share the fate of every imminent civilization before it. Liberalism will continue descending into radical subjectivity. Realism will continue retreating and adjusting. The oscillation will not stop because it has not been healed. It can only be interrupted by the vertical axis of the declared word fulfilled in Messiah. Without that interruption, both sides remain horizontal and both sides decay.